The mountains had vanished beneath a furious tide of white. The wind screamed like a living thing, battering the walls of the forgotten cabin with a force that shook its bones. Snow lashed against warped shutters, hissing like shards of broken glass. Each blast felt capable of tearing the roof away, leaving nothing but ruin in its wake. Inside, a single fire guttered weakly in the hearth, its fragile flames clawing at the darkness, fighting to hold back the cold that hunted them. Ethan Cross sat on the rough planked floor, his back to the wall, expensive coat clinging heavy and wet to his frame. Every muscle burned with exhaustion, yet he refused to loosen his grip on the woman in his arms. Maya Bennett. Her skin was white as marble, her breath shallow, her lips stained the color of bruised violets. She had collapsed after the car skidded off the mountain road and slammed into a drift of snow. Ethan had dragged her through the blizzard step by punishing step until this place rose like a ghost out of the storm. Without heat, without fire, she wouldn't survive an hour. He tore open a moth-eaten trunk, ripping free an old fur throw. The fire he had coaxed into being glimmered weakly against the hollows of her face, highlighting the stark blue of her lips. A curse burned low in his throat. He didn't hesitate. Shrugging off his coat, then hers, he wrapped them both beneath the weight of the fur and crushed her to his chest. Her body shook violently, tiny convulsions that spoke of the fight for life dwindling fast. Ethan pressed closer, trying to pour his warmth into her. The contact seared him, her skin so cold it felt unreal, like stone in a river. His pulse thundered, driven not just by the desperate struggle for survival, but by something older, something buried. He dragged in a breath, counting it, willing his body to behave. But every subtle rise of her chest against his own made that discipline feel fragile, breakable. Her lashes trembled. A flicker of green and gold appeared as her eyes cracked open, dazed and lost. For a moment, she didn't seem to know who held her. Then memory slid in, sharpening her gaze. Her lips parted on a whisper that barely stirred the air. "Mr. Cross, this isn't right." His arms tightened, voice low and rough as gravel. "If I let go, you die." She swallowed hard, the ghost of her breath brushing his throat. "But this, it feels..." The words bled away, dissolving into silence. The fire spat sparks, shadows leaping like wild dancers across the walls, cloaking them in a heat far more dangerous than the storm beyond the door. Under Ethan's hands, her chill began to ebb, replaced by the slow pulse of returning life, and with it came temptation, sharp and merciless. His mouth lowered toward her ear, his words a warning and a confession rolled into one. "Don't push me. I'm at the edge already." For a single suspended moment, the world narrowed to the beat of his heart, the heat of her skin, and the raw invitation glimmering in her eyes. Outside, the storm howled like a predator, daring him to break. His hand trembled where it gripped her spine, held between salvation and surrender. She shut her eyes, drew a deep breath, trusting him in a way no one ever had. That trust carved something open in him, left him unarmored. He pulled her tighter, anchoring himself to that thin, unbreakable line. Protect, not destroy. The fire flared, casting molten light over the cabin as if time itself had paused. Beyond the window, chaos reigned. Inside, something equally untamed stirred. Something neither had words for, yet both felt with bone-deep certainty. Ethan Cross had not set foot in Colorado's high country for nearly a decade. He had come now not for pleasure but for a deal, because deals were the only things that could still hold his attention. At 39, he was the youngest self-made giant in the American financial world, the man who turned crumbling ventures into empires. They called him ruthless in the press, brilliant in boardrooms. Those who knew him well called him silent and feared him for it. He wore control like a second skin. Nothing broke through, not market crashes, not betrayals. Nothing except the one thing that had gutted him 12 years ago when his wife and unborn son died in a wreck that splashed across every news channel in the country. 27, bright with plans, certain that the universe favored him. Then, in one bleeding instant, everything collapsed. The man who walked away from that wreckage was no longer the man who had loved. From then on, Ethan lived for one purpose: growth at any cost. He burned bridges, severed family ties, and turned intimacy into transactions. Love was a blade pressed to his throat, and he would never again bleed for it. And Maya Bennett? She had no place in his world, at least not on paper. 26. Smart. Fierce. A woman who could make her presence known even when trying to vanish into the background. Boston-born, raised by a mother who worked herself hollow to keep the lights on. When cancer stole that mother 6 years ago, Maya was left to finish college while raising 2 younger siblings. Then came her father, long gone, back with hands empty but debts heavy enough to crush them all. Those debts chained Maya to choices no one should have to make. The job offer with Ethan Cross had been her last card, a lifeline that promised enough pay to keep her family afloat. She had walked into his glass tower 6 months ago and walked straight into a storm of impossible standards. Perfection in every detail, silence in every corridor. He never raised his voice, never wasted a word, but one glance from him could cut deeper than a blade. And yet, beneath the ice, she had sensed something raw, something shattered and hidden away. It wasn't pity that drew her toward it. It was recognition. She knew what it meant to bury need under duty, to stand when your bones screamed to collapse. But fate had a cruel sense of humor. Its name was Richard Kane, son of a shipping tycoon, investor in oil and luxury resorts, a man with charm sharp enough to slice. He had once pursued Maya like a prize, dangling solutions to her father's debts like bait on a gilded hook. In exchange, her hand. The engagement had been a deal, not a dream, a trap disguised as rescue. She had never wanted Richard. She had always seen the rot behind the shine, the greed, the cruelty. But the vice tightened until she could no longer breathe, and taking the job with Ethan became her rebellion. Richard hadn't let go. Men like him never did. And men like Ethan, they never tolerated rivals. The two had crossed paths before, competitors in boardrooms, predators circling the same kill. Richard's arrogance was legend. Ethan's hatred of men who used power for sport was absolute. Collision was inevitable. The trip to Aspen was supposed to be routine, an elite investor summit at a glass and stone palace high in the Rockies. For Ethan, it was war, securing backing for a renewable energy project that would shatter old oil monopolies. Billions on the line, rivals watching for a stumble, investors circling like vultures. Maya's role: keep his world in perfect order. Schedules, files, flawless execution. A single mistake could cost millions. It was her first time traveling with him, and the sheer opulence of his world hit like a slap. A private jet slicing the clouds, a resort dripping with crystal chandeliers and power dressed in silk and steel. Maya, in her simple navy dress, moved through it like a ghost. But when she walked at Ethan's side, heads turned, whispers followed. His mistress? His acquisition? He noticed none of it, only the way she held herself, chin high, refusing to shrink. And then Richard appeared. The gala glittered around them, deals whispered under the swell of music. When Maya froze, every line of her body locking, Ethan followed her gaze. Richard Kane, tuxedo perfect, smile sharp enough to cut glass, possession burning in his eyes. The words that passed between them were low, lethal. Maya's pulse stuttered. Ethan's jaw hardened to stone. The rest of the night blurred in signatures and champagne, but the poison lingered. Richard's hand on Maya's, his whisper at her ear, the fear she buried too quickly. By dawn, storm warnings screamed across the valley. Ethan ignored them. Time was money. He ordered the drive down the pass. The first flakes fell like feathers. Then knives, white thickened into walls. The driver's knuckles bleached on the wheel. Maya stared out at a world dissolving in snow, heart pounding with a different dread. Ethan looked at her once, just once, and saw it all. The fear, the secrets, the storm inside her. Then the avalanche came. The mountain roared. White fury thundered down. Tires shrieked, glass shattered, and the world broke open. The wind struck like a wild animal as soon as he pushed the door open, icy shards lashing his face. Maya trailed behind, wrapped in the thick fur he had given her, ignoring every protest he threw her way. One look at the determination blazing in her eyes, and he knew it was pointless to argue. They fought through the knee-deep drifts to the old outbuilding leaning against the storm. Inside, the darkness smelled of rust and damp wood. They scavenged what they could: rope, a broken lantern, a weathered axe. No food, but the wood stacked in the corner promised at least a few more nights of fire. By the time they stumbled back to the lodge, both were breathless, snow clinging to hair and lashes. Maya faltered near the door, knees buckling. Ethan caught her, pulling her close without thinking, his hands gripping her arms until the tremor in her legs eased. For a fleeting second, he felt her heartbeat against his chest, warm and wild, and it nearly undid him. Her gaze lifted, uncertain, questioning, and the world beyond that moment ceased to exist. Then he tore himself away, his voice sharp to mask the ache. "Don't ever push yourself like that again. You'll get yourself killed." Something flickered in her expression. Hurt, maybe, but she didn't answer. She moved toward the hearth without another word, curling beneath the blanket like a wounded creature. Ethan stood frozen, guilt clawing at him. He hadn't spoken out of anger, not really. The truth was harder to face. Being near her was dangerous for reasons no storm could rival. Last night's words haunted him like a curse. "I can't control myself around you." And it was true. God help him, it was true. The hours crawled by in brittle silence. The driver stirred once, muttering about helicopters and rescue before sinking back into oblivion. Maya sat on the floor, tracing idle shapes into the dust with a stick, her shoulders tight. Finally, her voice broke the quiet, soft but steady. "You didn't have to help me out there. You could have left me." Ethan's jaw flexed. "I don't leave people behind." She studied him with those unflinching green eyes. "Even when it costs you?" The question hit its mark. He turned away, staring into the flames. "Get some rest," he muttered, low and rough. She lay down, but he knew she didn't sleep. Neither did he. He sat in the chair, rigid as iron, eyes fixed on the fire while another fire raged inside him, one he had no defense against. Night fell heavier than before. Outside, the blizzard clawed at the walls with teeth of ice, and inside, the firelight burned too warmly, throwing shadows that stretched long and intimate. Maya shifted under the blanket, restless. At last, her voice came, barely louder than the crackle of wood. "You don't have to keep watch all night." Ethan didn't move. "Someone has to. That's not why you're awake." Her tone was quiet, certain. "You're avoiding me, because of what you said." He looked at her sharply, but she held his gaze without flinching. "You told me you can't control yourself around me." The memory cut through him like a blade. He turned back to the fire, voice hard as stone. "Don't confuse survival with anything else. I kept you alive, that's all." Her lips pressed tight, her eyes glinting with something like disappointment. She rolled onto her side, back to him. The tremor in her shoulders. He told himself it was the cold. He knew better. Hours later, he rose to feed the flames, moving with deliberate calm. Still, every breath she drew seemed to echo inside his chest, testing walls he had spent a lifetime building, walls that now felt paper-thin. When dawn bled gray through the frosted glass, Maya sat up, hair tangled, cheeks pale, but her chin high. "I'm going to help," she said, her voice firm. "You can barely stand," he replied, narrowing his eyes. "Then I'll do what I can. Wood, water, whatever you need. I won't sit here like dead weight." Her defiance sparked something hot and dangerous in him. He stood, towering over her. "This isn't a game. One mistake out there can kill you. Do you understand that?" "I do," she said, steady as steel. "But I'd rather risk that than sit here waiting like a child." The air between them stretched taut as wire. Then Ethan exhaled slowly, dragging a hand over his face. "Fine. But you follow my lead. No questions." She nodded once, relief flashing in her eyes. Together they stepped out into the white silence. Snow buried the world in a suffocating hush. Ethan showed her how to find branches under the eaves, how to stack them so the storm wouldn't claim them. Her fingers fumbled, raw and clumsy, but she didn't complain. He watched, torn between admiration and fury. Back inside, she placed the wood by the hearth with a small, triumphant smile. "See? Not useless." He grunted, but something warm uncoiled in his chest. That night, as they shared a thin stew of beans and melted snow, she spoke softly. "You never asked why I was at that gala, why Richard was there." Ethan's spoon stilled. "Because it doesn't matter." "It matters to me," she whispered. "He's not just an investor. He's—" She stopped, biting the words. "He's what?" Ethan's voice was a low growl. "Nothing. Forget it." He wanted to demand answers, but instead he said quietly, "When you're ready, you'll tell me." The gentleness startled her. For a breath, the space between them softened. Then he pushed back his chair, the moment gone. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be worse." Maya curled by the fire. Her heart knotted in questions. Across the room, Ethan sat in shadow, fists clenched against the storm outside, and the storm inside that was breaking every rule he'd ever lived by. "You're making this impossible." Her breath caught, but instead of retreating, she leaned in slightly, just enough for her knee to graze his. The touch was fleeting, almost innocent, yet it jolted through him like a live wire. Ethan's hands curled into fists, every muscle rigid as his pulse thundered. "Maya," he said, his voice rough, fraying at the edges. "This can't happen." Her lips parted, her whisper steady and sharp as glass. "We're already past safety." Those words shattered his last line of defense. He bent closer, close enough that the heat of her breath mingled with his, close enough for the smoke in her hair to snare him like a promise he had no right to touch. For one raw, electric moment, the world existed only in the thin space between their mouths. And then, he tore himself back with a guttural sound, dragging both hands through his hair like a man fighting for air. "I can't," he ground out, his voice low and harsh. "If I start, I won't stop." She rose too, her eyes locked on his, burning with something dangerous. "Then maybe you shouldn't stop." The defiance in her voice struck like a blade, carving through every vow he'd made to himself. When she stepped toward him and brushed his arm, something inside him snapped. He seized her wrist, not to push her away, but to hold her there, to keep her from vanishing into the storm outside or the storm inside him. His eyes blazed, all restraint stripped bare. "I warned you," he whispered, his voice trembling with hunger he could no longer hide. "And I ignored you," she breathed, her chin lifting in challenge. The fire roared in the hearth. The wind screamed against the shutters. But inside the cabin, the only violence was the storm breaking between them. His hand slid to her waist, dragging her flush against him. Their bodies collided, heat mocking the icy world beyond the walls. Her breath shuddered, her fingers fisting in his shirt, their lips hovering on the knife edge of surrender. A sound shattered the spell. The driver groaned in his corner, rolling over with a curse. Ethan jerked back as if burned. Maya stumbled, clutching the fur tighter around her shoulders, her chest rising in harsh, broken breaths. He turned away, his hands shaking as he raked them through his hair, swearing under his breath. "This can't happen," he rasped, the finality in his tone like a slammed door. She didn't argue, didn't beg. She only turned, lowering herself beside the fire again, her face in shadow. The silence that followed was brittle, sharp enough to cut. Neither slept. Both lay awake in the flicker of dying flames, haunted by what had almost been. When dawn came, gray and merciless, they rose without a word. Yet every glance, every movement carried the weight of that unfinished kiss. The storm outside was breaking, but inside the cabin, something had already cracked wide open. By the seventh day, the wind's fury had waned, but the snow lay so deep that escape was still a dream. The cabin, once a cage, had turned into a sanctuary of secrets. Conversation shrank to survival tasks. Beneath every clipped word ran a current neither could deny. Ethan threw himself into repairs, venturing out for wood with his rifle slung across his back. Maya shadowed him, refusing to be left behind, her green eyes bright against the endless white. The driver, half drunk most days, muttered about rescue and money, about how Cross Enterprises would never let its CEO disappear. Ethan ignored him. Maya tried to, but dread curled like ice in her gut every time greed sharpened the man's voice. On the 9th morning, movement glinted through the frost. 3 riders cutting across the valley, their silhouettes stark against the snow. Ethan's body stilled, every instinct screaming danger. He gripped his rifle and moved to the door without a word. Maya saw his face and froze. "What is it?" she whispered. He tipped his head toward the window. She followed his gaze, and her breath strangled in her throat. The man in the lead wore tailored wool and arrogance like armor. Richard Kane. Her past, her prison, riding straight toward her. Fear and fury knotted inside her chest. "You know him," Ethan said, his voice flat as steel. Her lips trembled, but the truth clawed free. "He's my fiancé," she confessed hoarsely. "By arrangement, not by choice." Ethan's jaw flexed, lethal calm washing over him. "And he's here for you." She shook her head, desperation cutting through her words. "I won't go back. Not now. Not ever." His gaze hardened into something unbreakable. "Then he won't take you." The driver, catching sight of the riders, grinned like a man smelling profit. "Finally, rescue. That man looks like money. We can bargain." Ethan spun on him, fury so sharp it stole the man's breath. "You'll say nothing," he warned, voice low and deadly. "Not one word." The pounding on the door came moments later, heavy, deliberate. Ethan opened it into a wall of white and the cold smile of Richard Kane. "Cross," Richard drawled. "Boston said you were brilliant. Pity they left out kidnapper." Ethan's face didn't flicker. "You came far for a lost cause." Richard's smile sharpened. "I came to reclaim what's mine." "She isn't yours," Ethan said, his voice ablade. "She never was." The standoff fractured into gunfire. Chaos roared. Maya fought like a woman who had bled for freedom, until the cabin walls burned, and they were running into a night of snow and fire, breath and bullets mingling in the storm. Gunfire split the silence like lightning tearing open a winter sky. The first shot slammed into the doorframe, wood splintering across Ethan's shoulder as he dragged Maya to the floor. "Stay down," he barked, his voice a whip of command. She obeyed, breath ragged, as the cabin erupted into chaos. Richard's men poured through the doorway, boots pounding, eyes cold as the barrels they carried. Ethan moved like the soldier he'd sworn he'd never be again, rifle swinging, controlled bursts cutting through the white haze. Every bullet was a vow. She will not be taken. The driver lunged for the nearest man, shouting something about a deal. He didn't finish the sentence. Blood spread across the snow-stained boards as Ethan shoved him aside and fired again. Maya crawled toward the hearth, fingers clawing for the iron poker. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, but fear sharpened into fury when Richard's shadow loomed over her. "Maya," he said, calm, cruel. "Time to come home." Her grip tightened on the poker. "Home died the day you bought me." He reached for her. She swung with every ounce of strength left in her soul. The crack of iron meeting bone rang louder than the wind. Richard staggered, cursing, blood slick across his temple. "Move!" Ethan roared, hauling her up just as another shot shattered the window. He kicked the back door open and dragged her into the storm. The night swallowed them whole, white howling around black trees, snow clawing at their boots like teeth. Behind them, voices cursed and boots gave chase. Ethan fired blind into the dark, not to kill but to buy seconds, precious, bleeding seconds. They stumbled through drifts waist deep, lungs burning, fingers numb. The cold gnawed like a living thing. "Cabin ahead," Ethan rasped, spotting a hunter's shack half buried in snow. They crashed inside, slammed the bolt, and collapsed against the wall, chests heaving in sync. His face was wild, eyes dark with the taste of death too close. "You hurt?" he demanded, scanning her with frantic hands. She shook her head, tears freezing on her lashes. "I'm fine." "You're lying," he muttered, cupping her face like something he couldn't afford to lose. "God, Maya." Something broke then. Clean, inevitable. He kissed her like a man who'd run out of tomorrows. No hesitation, no retreat. The storm outside screamed its fury, But inside that shack, the world narrowed to heat and hunger and the brutal, beautiful fact that neither could let go. When it was over, they lay tangled on the rough boards, the fire they built between them raging hotter than the one in the hearth. For a few stolen hours, the war outside didn't matter. Only breath, only heartbeat, only the truth they could no longer deny. Dawn clawed at the sky in bruised shades of gray. They rose before it fully broke, packing what little they had, wrapping each other in silence and wool and vows unspoken. Ethan armed himself with grim precision. "They won't stop," he said. "Neither will I," she answered. The hunt dragged across 3 days of frozen wilderness. Gunfire cracked through valleys. Twice, Ethan took a bullet meant for her, once grazing his shoulder, once ripping through his coat and leaving a searing burn across his ribs. She stitched him with trembling hands, her tears falling like salt in the wound. "Why?" she whispered. "Why risk everything for me?" He caught her chin, forcing her to look at him. "Because somewhere between saving you and wanting you, I stopped knowing the difference." They made their stand in a canyon carved by ice and time, where echoes swallowed sound, and the river ran black beneath a skin of frost. Richard came himself, fury sharpening his face into something less than human. "You think you can steal what's mine?" he spat. "She was never yours," Ethan said, voice cold as the steel he held. The firefight erupted like thunder. Men fell, blood-stained snow. And when the smoke cleared, Richard lay broken, his empire reduced to whispers that would never reach the mountains again. They burned the last of the dead man's threats in the hearth of a cabin that no longer felt like a cage, but a beginning. Weeks later, when the snow softened and the valley whispered of spring, they walked out together, scarred, changed, unshackled. Boston never saw Ethan cross again. The name became smoke, a ghost in city glass towers. But in the high country, where rivers sang against stone and the skies stretched wild and endless, a man and a woman built a life out of ruin and fire. Some nights when the wind howled like memory, Maya would look at him over the rim of a whiskey glass and murmur, "Would you do it again?" And Ethan, hands calloused, heart hers, would pull her close and answer, "Every damn time."